of using the interpretation of these letters to translate word in the scripture, though you don't know Hebrew. When it comes to Hebrew, for the record, I'm illiterate. Okay, so this is not Hebrew grammar. It's not teaching Hebrew. And anybody that knows Hebrew might be very offended at anything I have to say. Just for the record, I acknowledge that. And you see, Balaam's ass was illiterate. Balaam's ass had nothing to say. Balaam's ass simply was responding to what he saw. And he got beaten for it. And Balaam's ass simply finally said, look it, I see something, I'm just telling you what it is, and if you don't like it, you can beat me with if you will, or you can respond to it if you will. But that angel was standing there, and he said what he was going to do to Balaam was a lot worse than what Balaam did to his ass. Balaam then had to decide what to do with that information. So this whole thing about Balaam's ass is, I'm Balaam's ass. For the record, it's like, I don't know nothing. I'm just see this, and if anybody else wants to regard it, you can regard it. And if you don't, you can throw stones if you choose, but I know that some people have regarded this type of thing with a degree of offense. So therefore, I'm not trying to say I'm going to quote Scripture to you in terms of anything I say here, you could take it for what it's worth. Okay, that being said, let's go through the basic letters. Now, in terms of where the letters came from, I have some papers here, which I can get out later and show you. It's generally regarded that a version of the Paleo, this is a version here. The Paleo here, which is the ancient letters, is in the middle. This is the modern Hebrew, particular font that I happen to draw. And this has to do with the Mishkan pattern down below here. Now, the thing about the Paleo, any archaeological findings of written script before 500 BC were in some version of this ancient Canaanite, Phoenician style. This modern style didn't start being in use until after 500 BC, when Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah the governor came out of Media Persia under Cyrus's decree to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, when the Yahudim were conquered by Babylon and went into captivity 70 years previously, nobody had this style of writing. But when they came out of Babylon, they had this style of writing. Ezra, from my understanding, wrote the Torah, the scriptures, and had other scribes write it, and it was in this modern style. So the question is, where did it come from? Well, I was talking to one person who suggested that when the finger of the Almighty wrote on the tables of stone on Mount Sinai, it was in this letter style. And then somehow it must have gotten lost, because this is the authorized version. So if it got lost, being at the time of David, which was about 1000 BC, it was about 1500 BC that was the time of Moses, basically, that somehow between 1500 BC and 1000 BC, this style must have gotten lost, and it started being that. Well, now, why would that happen? Moses got the writing from the Almighty, and he wrote stuff down, but yet he had been in Egypt. Did he write in Egyptian letters, or was he given this authorized version? And he wrote Torah scrolls. He wrote 12 of them and gave them to the leaders of the tribes of Israel. It says in Deuteronomy, I believe. And then somehow they changed all the Torah scrolls to be written like this, because I brought one copy of a page from the book of Leviticus, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's written in Paleo. And it's like, well, what happened? How did this get lost, and then at the time of Ezra it comes back to this? Well, this is also known as the Chaldean flame letters, or the Aramaic font. And Aramaic is from the area of Syria, which is also Assyria. And you go, well, now why would the Holy Writ be called Aramaic or Assyrian or Chaldean? Chaldean, where the Magi or where the word magician comes from, the ones, the astrologers, the ones who are kind of like what we would call magic arts. Why would they be using this letter style? Well, to make a long story short, what I think happened, questioning who would have had the audacity or the authority to have changed this letter style into that one at 1500 era BC. I mean, why would they do that? But who would have changed this letter style to that letter style? Well, if we look at Daniel 12, an angel shows up and talks to Daniel. Now, Daniel, at this point, this is the last chapter of the book of Daniel, he is the chief Magi, the chief Chaldean. And an angel shows up and tells him, hide the words and seal the book until the time of the end. That's the English translation. So, depending on what the word for hide and seal is, I project that Daniel was told to change something about the words to make them imperceptible. So you don't know what they mean. Now you could say, why in the world would Daniel be told to do that? Well, that's another part of the study. But anyway, my hypothesis is that Daniel changed this letter style to this letter style. And in so doing, made the understanding of the words and letters to be stopped, closed up, sealed, neutralized, so that they could not be determined what was really meant, which has persisted until now. And so what I'm trying to propose by this talk here is the unsealing, the unstopping, the unneutralizing of these words, which is a pretty big deal, if that's true. So if what I'm presenting is actually the undoing of what Daniel said, then the phrase, until the time of the end, in which case it says, well, they will be sealed and stopped up and neutralized until then you could say, well, what happens then? Well, that's another part of the story, but if this is that occasion of until, then this stuff is pretty significant. So the reason for doing this is to simply say, well, it's not then to say, what does it say? And that's the big mystery, but it's like, what's the ramifications of that? What the ramifications are, then you can take this mechanism of knowing what the letters mean to know what the words mean in order to do what the words say. And if you do what the words say, something should happen. In other words, knowing these letters is a tool, but it's the use of the tool which is the important thing. It's not just to say, yep, I got the tool, or yep, I know how to use the tool. I mean, if you have a hammer, you can say, this is great. I mean, you can go down to the local lumber yard, and there's some hammers that cost $200 made out of titanium, and it's like, wow, it's an expensive hammer. I don't want to use it. And it's like, if you don't use it, it's no good. So what I'm going to try to do here, which is hopefully I'll go slow enough to help you do this, is to show you how to use this understanding as a tool to read any word in the Tanakh. Now, in the Tanakh, I happen to have this one version by Stone Edition, and the reason I like this one, this is the, I think they call it the student version. It's kind of small. There's English on one side, and there's modern Hebrew on the other, but it's pretty clear. Carl has a version here, which I find will be a little bit harder to read the letters, and the format's a little different. What I've been doing, as far as I'm concerned at this point in time, this is the benefit of the English. Picture being out on the ocean. Everything is just this huge, vast, empty sea. And what you notice is a buoy or an island. And you go, oh, that buoy tells me where something is. Everything else otherwise looks the same. So the English is like that buoy. The English words and letters simply tell you where something is as a matter of reference. But it's when you put on your gear and you dive down that you find what's under the buoy is the issue. I really don't trust the English much anymore, other than as an indicator where something is. So if you say, a certain chapter and verse that tells you where it is. But it's like, but if you don't know the chapter and verse, it doesn't tell you. But if you say, oh, this is what the verse says, and you go, oh yeah, I remember that, and that's the subject I want to look at, that's like the buoy. But if you don't know the Hebrew, you're trusting what somebody else is telling you it's saying with no way to validate it. Now, if you say, well, look, I'll just get different Bibles. There's at least 100 translations in English. Which one is the authorized one? Well, the KJV, the King James, they were authorized. Well, that's what people say. But I'll tell you, I would think that whoever made Stone's edition probably understands Hebrew better than those translators of King James, I would think. And there's some verses I read in here which look like a whole different verse. Sometimes they don't even match. I mean, at all. It's like, well, now what do you believe? Do you believe KJV or do you believe Stone's? And then it compelled me to sit there and look at the Word and say, well, now, where do they come up with that? And I don't have any mechanism for reading the Word. I could look at Strong's Concordance, but sometimes, you know, you look at Strong's Concordance and they don't even have the right spelling of the word. Or they'll tell you it's based on another word that means another thing, and it's like all of a sudden it's like some words aren't even the same letters, maybe one or two letters out of half a dozen, and it's like, can I trust this? I don't know. I don't know if I can trust Strong's. I don't know if I can trust the KJV. I don't even know that I can trust the English translation in this to tell me what this says. So it forced me to look at these letters. But I'm illiterate. I don't know what these letters mean. So I have a dictionary. Just for what it's worth, this is an incredible, I think, an incredible dictionary. I've just about worn it out. It's only a couple years old. I've opened this thing thousands of times. Comprehensive Etymological Dictionary of the Hebrew Language for Readers of English by Ernest Klein. It's about $100 and something book. Etymological, it tells you where the words came from, so if you read it, it might tell you some Arabic words, some words from other languages, a little bit of Latin, a little bit of Greek, some similarities. But the benefit of this, to me, is that if you look up a word that starts with a couple letters, and then you look at all the words that start with those same letters, you get a feeling for the effect that those couple letters have on all the words which are of a similar regard. Similar, you might say, to English prefixes and suffixes. You know, all the words that in English start with the same prefix are going to mean something about the same. And you could say, well, a prefix is different than the actual word. I could go through a bunch of particular cases, but the point is, if